Hello, everyone. This is Jacob Owen, systems engineer with Aruba here in Indiana. I wanted to take some time today to set up or go through the setup of VSF-enabled switches with Aruba Central. So VSF stacking is one of the two stacking methods that we support within the Aruba OS switching product line. It uses front-side ports, 1 or 10 gig or 40 gig, depending on the capabilities of the switch. And it's a virtual stacking technology. The other mechanism to do stacking is backside stacking or backplane stacking, using dedicated modules on some switches like the 2930M or the 3810M, but the 2930Fs as well as the 5400Rs, they both use VSF as a stacking technology. So the first thing we need to do, obviously, is to have an Aruba Central account and to have the devices that we want to, add to the VSF stack in the device inventory and have a subscription assigned to them. So in this case, I've got my two 2930Fs here that are going to be part of that, and then I've also got the subscription assigned to these devices right here. So we are good to go there. The other thing we need to do is we obviously need to come in here and set up a new group for VSF stacking switches. So multiple switch stacks can be in the same group. Essentially, what we think of a group as a configuration container where things like VLANs, DNS settings, kind of more switch settings that would cover multiple switches, like all the switches in a building may, be part of a single group, and from that, all the VLANs are inherited from the group level. But essentially what I've got here is I've got a 2930F UI, but if we wanted to create a new group, we would go under, we'd click this filter here, we'd go to groups, we'd hit the gear, we would then create a new group down here. The thing to remember is these two check boxes right here. If they are checked, it is going to make this group a template group. Template group uses a different configuration method than UI, so you want to make sure that you uncheck this and you give it a group name and then you set a password. This password will be the default admin password for the switch unless you override it locally, once this is in there. Once that's in there, we can then start to make configuration. So what I want to do is once the group's created, what I always recommend doing is putting the commander switch that you want to put in there or in the stack into the group that you want to set it up as. So that for that reason, it can immediately start to, pull configs from the group. Otherwise, it'll come into the default group, and then you'll have to move it to whatever group. So I just like doing it before the switch comes online from here. So we just go into device inventory, we highlight it, and then we click on assign group, and we pick the group that we want to look at. We don't have to do it for the member switches because they will be pulled in when they are stacked. Okay, so now you can see that is part of the 2930F UI group. We'll go back to account home, go back to network operations. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the group. Go into the group. And then from here, we're going to go into switches and click the gear. So actually right now you can actually see that this device has already been provisioned into the group. Now it has not been seen, so therefore it's considered to be down, but it is in the group because we put it there under the device inventory. We click the gear icon to go into the configuration, and now we can come in here and start setting up some of the switching details. And I'm going to bring the switch online just so it'll start to communicate. We can actually start pushing configuration changes. I do have this switch up right here. As of right now, it does not have a configuration because it has not pulled down the config yet from Central. So what we'll most likely see is here in about 10 to 15 seconds, we'll actually see that it's going to okay, so it's still trying. Okay, so now it has been managed. Okay, so pretty much I know that it's pulled its config down because it's now asking for a username, because anytime it inherits its config from the group, that group contains a admin username as well as a admin password, unless you override the admin with another operator or manager account. But in this case, it's just admin. Type. Okay, so now I'm in the switch. You can see here that it has very little config. The one thing to note is it does have listed VLANs here because I did actually have the VLANs specified already under the group. This is a nice thing about the group config is that you can predefine the VLANs that you want the switch to know about. And then as soon as the switch inherits those, it will start to come down. One of the things to note about UI managed switches, and this is just something I always let everybody know, is that the only management VLAN we can currently use, so the only one we can put an IP address on and manage it, is VLAN 1. Now you may say, hey, I have VLAN 10 or VLAN 200 or whatever it is that you manage in your environment. This is just simply saying from this switch's point of view, it's going to reference whatever that untagged VLAN is as VLAN 1. So if you have an untagged VLAN of 10 from an upstream core switch, when that untagged VLAN 10 connects to the switch, it's going to be seen as VLAN 1. So that's where you would put your VLAN, your config at, your IP address, your default gateway. It would not, know about VLAN 10. So it's something to be aware of. It's a limitation that I believe is being worked currently, and hopefully will be, fixed in a future release. But currently, that is the limitation that we have. So if we come in here, we can go into here. Actually, before we set a static IP address, which I always like to do, we have to come in here and we actually have to set up a static name server, which actually this has been defined at the group level, so I don't have to do that. So we can come back to switches. We can come in here. We can now set the static address to 10.0.10, 255.255.252.0, and then the default gateway, it's inherited from DHCP. So it'll just keep that. And so now we're now pushing this configuration down. You can see now, oh, I forgot to change the host name, which I always like to do. One of the other things is that you cannot, actually you'll see here if I try to do 2030F, you cannot set a host name that starts with numbers, which is just a limitation currently of the system. So I'll call this UI 2930F. Save that. And I'm going to go back into the, and we can pretty much see as soon as this config change takes place. Give it a couple seconds. Okay, so I think the other component that I forgot to add at the group level was the time servers. So I went ahead and set time.apple.com and time.google.com as HTTP servers. Okay, so now we can see that the switch is managed. It has all the VLANs. It has the IP information. As you can see, I am using VLAN 3 on my upstream switch, but from this switch's perspective, I am using the default VLAN, as I discussed earlier. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in here, and I'm going to start to set up the stack. So the way these stacks are going to be built is I have two 2930Fs that I'm going to be setting up. They look down. It's pretty much going to look like this right here. I'm going to be using ports 1.9 and 2.9, as well as 110 and 210. One thing I have noticed is when setting up VSF via the web, via Central, I have found that I cannot push both ports 1.9 and 110, as well as 2.9 and 210 in the config on the initial setup. So what I'll do is I'll set up 1.9, let the switch reboot come up, and then I'll join the secondary member to it, and I'll set its port to 2.9, and then whenever it comes up and is running VSF successfully, I'll go in and modify it and add port 10 to it as well. The other thing to note is in a 2-port stack, we will only use one of the VSF links. We will not use VSF link 1 and 2. So even if we have 2 ports, we'll just put them both in VSF link 1. Whereas if we had something like this, you know, the link between member 1 and member 2 would be link 1, and then between this switch and this switch would be link 2, and then these would close that loop. So we would use both of the links there, but we do not do it for just a 2-member stack. If you try to do it, the switch will complain and pretty much say, hey, I see myself on the other side of that link, because it's essentially creating a loop, if you will, across the stack. So this is what we'll do. We'll go in here, we'll set up this, or we'll go under the group, devices, switches, we'll click the gear, and then we'll click on the master, or I'm sorry, the commander switch. And then here's where we're going to set up the link name. We're just going to call it VSF _1_1. And then this is where we're going to set up the ports. And this is the port that's going to be after the VSF link comes back online. We're going to be using 1/9. As I mentioned, since it's a 2-switch stack, we will not be using link 2, so I'm going to leave this empty. The domain ID just needs to be set the same across the VSF stack. So I'm going to use domain ID 1. And then the port speed, we are using 10 gig direct attached copper cable, so we're going to call it 10 gig. So at this point, check everything. Everything looks good. And I'm going to save and reboot the stack. We're going to hit OK. We're going to come down here. And then as you can see, I'm consoled into the switch. You can immediately see that it's already rebooted the switch because it has changed from VSF, non-VSF enabled to VSF enabled. So we'll wait for this to come back online. It takes about 2.5 minutes. Okay, so the switch is back online now, and as you can see, it's in a pending state on Central, so it's waiting for the switch to come back online. Because what it essentially does, it pushes out the VSF stack information, it reboots it, and then when it comes back in, it finishes the config download. So as we can see here, yeah, as you can see here, it's got the member 1, the MAC address, the priority, the link names. As you can see, ilink1 and ilink1-2 or _2. They have not been updated yet to the new name as well as the port numbering that we've set up. So if we just keep watching it, essentially this is going to come back in. Okay, so it's managed now, show run. Okay, so as you can see now, link 1/9 has been updated. Okay, so for some reason it still looks like the link name has not changed, so we can actually go in here and come back in here and modify this and just make sure that it pushes out the correct VSF name. Usually we'll just change something. Once we've got this online, we can now go in and set up the secondary member. So in the case of this, we're going to set up a secondary member that happens to be the exact same as the commander in terms of the model, which is an Aruba 2930F 8G PoE switch. We could pick another one if it was another type of switch. Just got to call it out as to what it is, but in this case, it's the same. So from this switch's perspective, the link 1 name is going to be VSF VSF_2_1, and its port ID is going to be 2/9. Because remember, we're talking about it from this switch's perspective. We're going to save that. We'll come back into the switch, and as you can see now, it has member 2's information. It shows it as a type JL258A, and then it also has, it's changed the link 1 name to VSF_11. And for some reason, it still does not like the port name for this one. I don't know why I have to do it again. I just like to make sure it's all in line before and configured correctly before. Okay. It'll update whenever I plug in the secondary switch. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug into my second 2930F-8, as you can see here. It does not have a configuration, it's completely basic. I'm going to plug in port 9 on the second one. Port 9 on the first switch is already plugged in. So we're going to watch here in probably 5 to 10 seconds. You're going to see the switch detect that there's a VSF peer on the other side, which is then going to start the VSF process. The second 2930F has to be in a factory default configuration in order for this to work. Just because that's part of that process is to listen for the VSF peer information, and if it detects it, it then starts the process to create the VSF stack and reboot. Okay, and there you go, rebooting to join VSF fabric with domain ID 1. So it detected it, it saw that it needs to join this VSF fabric, and it's going ahead and rebooting. I'm going to go ahead and move back to the original. Go to show VSF. We're going to see that no stack is formed yet. But it should be coming online here probably in about 60 to 90 seconds. It'll be online and be ready to start operating as part of the stack. Just showing it's inactive. Yeah, the first time a VSF enabled switch gets VSF enabled and reboots, the initialization takes a little bit longer than the initial boot, so that may be why it's taking a little bit longer here. Okay, so now it's showing up as standby booting, so it does see that there is a, the MAC address of the other peer. It sees that it's a, 2930F8 port. It sees the VSF topology as a chain. Now we can go back into Central, and we will see it has now communicated that information into Central. And you can see the priority 255, that's going to be the commander, that's going to be the secondary. In case the commander fails, and so on, and for the rest of the switches in the stack. Okay, and as I was expecting, the link 1 name VSF2_1 did appear once we got the secondary in there. So just, I guess, waiting for that second one to come online and then push that configuration down. Okay, so now we have a fully functioning VSF stack. And we can go into Central, and we can now go into the interfaces, and we can start modifying port settings. Now, once you put a VSF, or once you put a switch into a VSF stack, you can no longer modify it at the group level. A standalone switch you can, as this command says right, or as this alert says right here. you have to do it at the commander. So essentially what we do is we go back to switches, click on the switch, we go to device, and now we can go in and start making, specific changes like regards to the VLAN assignments on the uplink or on the downstream ports. We click on this, we can go in, we can set, port 1/1 as being tagged on all the because that's the uplink. And then we can start modifying the individual member ports. We'll push those settings out. Now we'll go into the switch and we'll go to show run interface 1/1. And you can see now we've got the tagged VLANs 2, 4, 5, and 83, as well as untagged VLAN 1. And so now we've essentially created a stack using Central, and we can now start to manage it as a cohesive a single unit. We can go in here, click on this, click on overview, and now we can see that it is showing up as a stack. Shows the port status here, whether up, down, the MAC addresses, if there's any devices connected. So what I'll do is I'll plug a port into 1/5, which is going to be a IP phone. So I'm going to set it to 1/5. Actually, we'll go into VLAN. We'll go into 1/. So we'll have to set it for voice on 1/5. We'll set that to tagged. And then we'll set, data as VLAN 4 on 1/5 as untagged. And I'll plug in this IP phone. Now, the thing to remember is it takes a couple seconds or it takes a couple minutes for data to start showing up into Central from a downstream device. So we may not see this immediately show up, but it will show up. So the client devices will actually show up. We can see, the neighbor devices that are connected to this. I have an upstream 6300F. It's connected. And I will wait for my Okay, so on my laptop that I've got connected behind the phone, I'm getting an IP address on VLAN 4 as expected, and my phone, once it kind of finishes booting, just a few more seconds. Has gotten an IP address on VLAN 83, and you can see that VLAN 83 has been tagged because it is the voice VLAN. So that is the way we move from a single standalone switch to a VSF managed switch with Aruba Central, and then we can start modifying VLANs, port settings. Just like I said, the thing to note is, remember if we're, one other thing. As I mentioned earlier, if we want to add additional stacking bandwidth for this setup, we would go into stacks. And this is what I said I found that I cannot do on the initial setup, but I can do once it's been up and running. So now I can go in and I can say, comma 1/10. I can push that. I can come in here and I can say, comma 2/10. So now what I can do is I can actually set up, I can connect my second set of stacked ports, and it will essentially create the two 20 gig bidirectional backplane between the two 2930Fs. We'll verify that it's coming online. I think this takes a couple, like I said, it's a couple minutes for it to start to show up. We'll see if any devices, okay, we've got two client devices now showing up. We've got the phone as well as the PC. One of the things I have noticed is we won't have IP address information in here unless we go into the switch and we turn on the IP client tracker command. This is not available via the CLI, I'm sorry, via the GUI. You have to do it via the CLI. So what we do is we go in here, big T, go to Aruba Central support mode enable, and it's going to ask us if you sure you want to do this. I'm going to say yes, and then I'm going to do IP client dash tracker, exit, right M, Aruba dash, we'll go back in and we'll shut off support mode. The thing to note is since we're not making changes to the CLI that have a comparable central config, it's not going to be overwritten by the central config. So perfect example is if I created a local VLAN by using the Aruba Central support mode enable command, I would not be able to keep that config after I disable support mode because Central would detect that there was a local override, and it would say no, I don't support that, and it would overwrite that with whatever, it would remove that VLAN. But for things like the IP client tracker or the AAA commands, that 802.1x MAC authentication, user roles, dynamic segmentation, things like that, it can be done local and it will not be overwritten just because there's not a associated config snippet within Central. Okay, so let's see if these guys are showing up yet. We'll wait a couple minutes. Okay, still not up yet. Okay, so we do see that both ports 19 and 110 as well are showing up here. Wait on these guys to update. Okay, so just took a little bit of time, and now you can see that 19 and 110 are both used as the VSF link 1 between the two switches. And on the connected page, I do have an IP address showing up for the PC. The phone, I think it's trying to reach out to its voice call manager, but it's just a dumb phone. It doesn't really have anything to connect to, so I don't think it's getting its information correctly. But it is seeing the MAC address. It does have an IP address I'm able to ping, but it's not pulling that in, which is 10.3.80.11. So that just once the phone was active, I have a feeling it would start to show that information. So, as I said, the only things really to be aware of are if you're using a setup like this, you can use the VSF link 1 and 2, but in a situation like this, you can only use a single VSF link with either 1 or 2, or you have even up to 4 if you're using like a 24 or a 48 port switch with 4 10 gig connections. You can use as many as you want for the VSF link for stacking bandwidth. So hopefully you found this useful. I look forward to speaking with you again soon. Thank you.